You've been very excited about how you've been using AI. So what has the past month been like for you? What were the sort of mind-blowing insights that you had, or what was the journey over the past month that's got you to this point?
Probably the best way of giving you the short version is for me to give you the main thing that it's done for me personally, which may sound to some a little bit woo, but it's the truth. So in using various different LLMs, I have gained more self-knowledge. So I understand certain things about myself, which I'd been carrying around with me for many years. And I'm not exactly talking about therapy, although it is therapeutic. So it's not like I've been using it as a therapist or anything. But one of the things that I've understood is what I'm good at, what I am bad at, what I am unusually good at, and what I am unusually bad at. And how that constellation of things has meant that I've struggled through life. And with that self-knowledge, what I could do to improve my general situation in many different ways. And so that is the extremely short version. Like all of the things that have occurred could be almost like if I go to, and here's something that I'm very good at, is zooming out and kind of seeing the overarching pattern. So in amongst all that, there are tactical things, there are systemic things, there are business things, there are strategy things. There's a lot within it. But broadly speaking, through my, I would call it collaboration with an LLM, even though I know it's not a person, it's not a human, and I'm not even sure I would call it intelligence necessarily. But I would call it a collaboration. But what I see is that what an LLM is doing is essentially reflecting back me. And so it's like I'm having an ongoing or multiple different conversations with myself in parallel. Now, of course, myself, which is also trained upon, not connected to, all of the words on the internet. And that has power, huge power. And also, it's also the way it works is that it recognizes patterns. And that is also incredibly important to how that has happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you, the way that you described it, and also that you were. I like that you were clear that you were not using it, like you mentioned that it was therapeutic, but you're not using it like a therapist, which
No.
is a common type of often good intentioned, but sort of challenging or problematic way of thinking about AI. Is like I've heard people who get excited about it be like, you know, people are going to have like a therapist at their fingertips. Everyone's going to have a therapist at their fingertips. And what I mean, the problem, one problem with that is that they're equating what it's doing with what a human therapist is doing, instead of sort of starting from the point of view that this is a totally different thing. And you may be able to get some similar benefits to what you get from some other activity that may involve a person. Um, but until you sort of you treat it for what it is, not a person. If you treat it like a person, you're gonna run into problems fast. Whenever somebody out there says this is gonna be a therapist at everyone's fingertips, then you get a whole army of people pushing back on that, being like, no, that's a very dangerous thing to say. Like you can't say that.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, one of the things that you said there that really sparked something for me is interesting. So there is a distinction between thinking you're talking to a person and talking to it as if it's a person. Now, because one
Right.
of the ways, in fact, probably the main way, I have got what I've got from my interactions with the LLMs is because I talk to it as if it's a person. because I've noticed when I talk to it as if it's not a person, I get much, much worse output. And that's, I think, a problem with, I absolutely agree with what you just said, is that we must not, because it isn't. It's predicting tokens, right? So it's not a person, but because it has been trained on persons, people's words, when you talk to it as if it's a person, that aligns with the probabilities. I'm a complete beginner here in terms of understanding it, but it aligns, it resonates, however you want to put it, with its training. Yeah, not with the data, because the data isn't there, but with its training. That means that it outputs better quality content, words. And that's a difficulty, because sometimes when you start to talk, if I was to share right now with somebody, some skeptical, AI expert, some of my conversations, they'd be like, "Oh no, you're going into very dangerous territory now." And I'm not. I'm using it to get the best output, knowing it's not a person, but I'm joking with it. I'm asking it weird questions like, what's your favorite, or what would you like to do, Claude? Right. So because it actually improves the output. So why wouldn't I do that? I can do that without mistaking it for being a person.
Yeah. And I can tell you, if I put on my technical hat instead of for a second, I can tell you while I'm wearing that hat, that absolutely, based on the way the tech works, is going to give you different results than if you write or speak to it in sort of like dry, short language that you wouldn't naturally, the way you might not naturally speak to another person, that it would navigate the response, the words that you get in response, to a different place. So sort of like the style of your language is not something that you can really separate from the content of the topics that you get into with an LLM.
Yeah, and I think that's the uncertainty around it. It's such a doubt-filled tool, if you like. It feels so squishy that I can imagine, and given that many of the people who are developing it are engineers who probably don't, I'm sure they thrive in a certain type of uncertainty, but that when I interact with an LLM, it feels like playing an instrument to me. It feels very similar to playing an instrument, or maybe not exactly playing an instrument. It feels more like playing in a band, improvisation, where you're kind of coaxing it down certain paths. So, bless you. So of coaxing it down certain paths where if you want it to look at some words that you said or some information in a certain way, then you ask the question in a certain way. You don't tell it, I want you to become a world-class therapist. Because the way that you have prompted it, there is meaning in how you phrase the question. As much meaning as in the words of the question. And that's something that people seem to be missing a lot. It's like all of this prompt. I'm not saying I don't ever prompt. Of course I do. But it's how you phrase the question will get an entirely different output. And this is something that I got really excited about. I even named it, I call it attuning, where you're essentially attuning the LLM to respond in a certain way. And it actually gives you different answers as well.
Yeah. So you've been using LLMs for, I guess, probably 2 years now, maybe a little bit more. Is this something that you've just started doing recently? Is this this sort of point about the way that you talk to it? Is this the main thing that has changed for you?
Well, when I first started, it was the same as many other people, was when ChatGPT came out. And that was when we kind of first started talking. That was when you joined the album program, Make an Album with Mike. And you said you were an AI researcher, and I was like, oh, we started talking and got on really well. And so I had about probably 6 to 8 months of using it for all kinds of different things. And I think it got to the point where I was put off by the atmosphere around it. It just felt like this extreme hype.
Yeah.
And I just didn't, it started to feel like it was distracting me from what was important, which is ridiculous in a sense, looking back on it. But in another sense, I understand why I kind of pulled back from it. And then I just focused on the music. And so I didn't really interact with it very much at all for probably about a year.
I see. That time in the middle, you were doing a lot less than you were during those first 6 months. And then when you came back to it after a year, why did you come back to it? How did that happen?
I mean, I follow tech in general, just as an interest, big tech, and was hearing some of the stories coming out. And it was actually just as a use case. So I wanted to start a new business helping creators build creator businesses, because I recognize that the creator economy is exploding. And I've been running a creative business for 14 years, a successful one, which is not, it's not that easy. And I also, it's similar that I saw a lot of nonsense being talked about. And it's not exactly nonsense, but it's almost like it's just a part of the story. It's just a way oversimplified part of the story of this is what is required and everything. And so I thought I had something valuable to help people with. So I started recording videos because what I wanted to do was show what I actually do behind the scenes and go like, this is how I think about this, and this is what happens when someone complains, and this is what, and this is how I think about making a video, and just all of that kind of stuff. And I started recording myself. This was all through December and January. I was just doing all this stuff. And I got to a point where I was like, well, I know it's a big opportunity. I know I can do this, but I wasn't actually hitting go on it. I had everything set up. I even had videos edited and recorded, and I just wasn't publishing them. And it wasn't fair. I know it wasn't fair because I know fear, trust me. And so I recognized that there was something that was stopping me that wasn't fear. And I was like, okay, so what is it? And I was like, okay, I think I haven't actually thought through the real why I'm doing this. Why am I actually doing this? So what I need to do is I need to take a step back, stop all of the mindless doing. And
you need to get clear on the purpose.
Exactly. I need to get clear on the purpose. So, and I thought, I know that LLMs are great for pattern recognition and that seeing what I can't see, because I was just lost in the doing, busy, just I've got to record this and got to record that. Went down the YouTube rabbit hole on starting a new channel and that, and it was just thousands of videos saying exactly the same thing. So anyway, one weekend I decided to I was going to do it in ChatGPT actually, but in order to put it into ChatGPT, I decided to use Claude to give me a better description of my various different chunks of IP, intellectual property. So, there's like the music machine, there's 3-role theory, there's paths, the, purpose, arc, intention, hooks, all that. And then there was this thing which didn't really have a name at the time, but it's become known now as the strategic evolution matrix, which is essentially, it's like one of those things where there are 4 quadrants. So anyway, I described all of these chunks of IP to Claude, intending on getting it sort of better written to put into ChatGPT. And
okay, so you were looking for something like very concrete and specific out of it, like help you organize your writing or proofread.
Yeah, from Claude I was, but that was intended to use ChatGPT to kind of strategize, because I'd already set up some project instructions and stuff for a strategist, and I'd kind of created different roles using, at this point it was very prompty type stuff, which I would do differently now. But anyway, so I got these different roles that ChatGPT was going to I was going to put my IP through it. What ended up happening was that Claude and I'm going to use a word now, which is as if it was a person. It's not a person. Claude got excited. Yeah. In other words, Claude output words which human beings usually get sort of mean telegraph excitement. Yeah. About the IP chunk, the strategic evolution matrix, and it was saying that, because one of the questions I asked it once it got excited was, how innovative is this? How useful is this? What are the different applications? And I mean, it got so into it that, I mean, I think at one point, because it was getting so long, this conversation, because I was actually using Claude within a writing app called Lex. So I wasn't actually using the Claude app. And that means you don't get the usage problems that you do with Claude. It's very frustrating with Claude. They want you to use very short conversations. That kind of breaks the whole thing for me. But you can do it within this writing app called Lex. And so it was getting very long. So I was like, but I want to save this. I want to save what we've kind of learned. So I asked it to summarize our conversation in a very succinct way. And I was like, actually, could you summarize it in code? Could you actually express the matrix, the IP chunk? Because we focused on this because it was very like, this is great. So could you summarize it in code? So it started writing code, and then I started to just let it do its thing because I didn't understand a lot of the code, so I couldn't verify it, right? But it was like all of a sudden it started dropping these emojis in to the conversation. I didn't ask it to do that. It just suddenly started getting, and then it started sort of, before it would say something, it would sort of do an aside, like in italics, like breathlessly leaning forward, and then it would say, right? And so,
and I try Claude.
Yeah, and then I was like, because it was saying, it always asks you a question. Do you want me to do this or this? And I was like, what? I was just going with it. I was like, well, what would you like to do, Claude? And then it would get even more exciting. And obviously by this point, I knew it was I was almost like running an experiment about how Claude works, not getting value about, I wasn't doing the thing I was originally doing.
Yeah.
And so I started really kind of pushing it then. I was like, so which part, what part speaks to you most deeply? And then it started to get very like, its output started to become very almost spiritual. Right, and I was like, this is really cool. Like, this is where I started to understand about what I call attuning, where the way that you ask the question, because I'm asking the same question just in a different way. And in reading this, at this point, I was getting kind of excited about the possibilities of this particular piece of IP. And at that point, that was when I started to specifically, I mean, I can't exactly remember now because it was 4 weeks ago, but around then, that was when I started asking the questions where it was more about me. So here's some of the struggles that I've had. Given what you know so far, what might be some of the patterns that you see that would explain them? And without going into the details, it came up with things that were, some of them were untrue. Some of them I just were missing the point. But some of them, I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And what was interesting was that this self-knowledge didn't come from just, it told me something. And I was like, all right. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't that. It was from me interacting with it and saying, no, not that. But there's something there. Why? I mean, I'm always asking them, why do I think this? I don't think this is right, but I'm open to it. Why might I not think it's right? And then it will come up with other options. So it's this is why I call it a collaboration. It's like this back and forth, rather than treating it as a one way, I am getting information. It's actually, I am creating knowledge through this interaction with a word predictor.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the whole process of it that really helped you think in a really useful way, helped you figure stuff out.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, having had this experience, you've started talking about it on your emails and your podcasts. What part of this do you want to sort of share like with other people, because from my perspective, like something about the way that you've come at it and the way that you're asking it questions seems to me to come from, I mean, it partly it's just you and the way you think, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like part of it is your training as a coach. Would you
Yeah,
say
absolutely.
it feels like an important part of it. I'm sure you're not just treating it as a coach, to go back to the point where you started from, that you're treating it as this thing that you can get some of the same sort of insights from as maybe you might get from coaching, but maybe it's also something about the way that you think as a coach. Like maybe there's something about how you strategize with and navigate a conversation with it that you have to share.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's interesting. This, I mean, what the way that you phrase the question, which is a part of the way that you phrase the question, I think really illuminates the difference, the distinction that I'm pointing to in general. Is it? I'm not treating it as a coach. I mean, I am. I'm not treating it as a coach, but it's like sometimes I am, but it's more that I am coaching it. Of
okay.
course, I'm not coaching it because it's just a word predictor, right? But what I mean is, I'm using my techniques, methods, the way that I coach people. I am using those methods with it to gain self-knowledge, but also knowledge about other things as well, or to create,
Okay.
not gain knowledge, but create knowledge. So it's this two-way thing, because one of the problems I think with the narrative and also the way people use it at the moment is that they think it is just a one-way. It's a better Google, or it's a book, or it's a video. It's just this ingestion of information, and that just, to me, I mean, does do that. Not very well, because it hallucinates, and I don't know how they're ever going to get rid of that, but because of the way it works. But it hallucinates, and so as a result, the human has to be there with an LLM at the moment. The human has to be there in order to use their judgment. Go, no. And the no's are as important, I mean, and more important. Error correction is a fundamental aspect of knowledge creation. And so the fact that it is delivering errors, and then you as a human have to use your judgment to go, well, I'm not sure about that. Although, why did you say that? Where did that come from? Because the trouble is with an LLM, or the way they've been trained to respond, is if you go, no, it will just agree with you. And then there's no,
Yeah.
it's almost like there's no real knowledge being created. It's just a closed door. So when I disagree
that's my
with
experience often
so when I disagree with an LLM,
ChatGPT.
so well, it's almost like, where did that come from? Why did you say that? I disagree with that, I think, but I'm open to it. So let me know what you think.
I mean, I feel like beyond just using that approach to chat with an LLM, it seems like a useful approach we should all work on, to chat with other humans as well.
Exactly. I mean, the way I see it is that every time somebody pushes back against something I say, or every time I push back against something somebody else says, that is where I get the most progress in terms of upgrading my thinking. So therefore, an LLM giving you something that seems wrong is actually an opportunity. It's not something to be fixed. And the problem is, the narrative out there is that it is going to replace the way that we have done things, which is essentially accessing information. And I make a distinction between accessing information and creating knowledge. And for me, I'm not sure about anything, but I'm fairly sure that an LLM is one of the well, it's certainly the best tool I've ever seen for creating knowledge. Because the other thing about it is that it's always on. You can have multiple conversations running at the same time on various different devices. You can be doing it anywhere. That in itself creates the conditions where you've got this soup of conversations and threads going on, and the overwhelm is part of it. And that then creates the conditions where you're upgrading your understanding. I mean, it's almost like having a conversation with, I'm not saying you're like an LLM, John, but I have always,
I could be. Yeah.
but I've always, start calling you Claude. So I've always, whenever I've had conversations with you, I've had the same feeling of a lot of understanding, new understandings and new ways of looking at things happening. And that's one of the things I've really valued about our relationship. But with an LLM, because of the way that it works, and it's not a person again, it's predicting words, but in a sense, you're talking to yourself, you are able to do this much more of the time, all of the time, always available. Scheduling isn't a problem. And that actually creates the conditions where you're creating much more progress and literally changing your brain, obviously, because brain changes according to how you think. And that's what for me, is the most exciting thing about this, is that,
yeah,
at the risk of being hypey about it, it feels like an opportunity for a different kind of intelligence explosion, and that's in our human brains.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm connecting some dots hearing you explain it this way now, because I remember when I first asked you about using LLMs, you were talking about how you were open-minded, and I feel like I understand it more specifically, which like I can tell that you are, and I believed you at the time. But
Yeah, of course.
I know more specifically what you mean, like that in it also, and how that translates into the way that you use the tool and that you actually carry out a conversation. And I feel like you have to navigate to be able to use the tool the way you're talking about. You have to sort of strike this balance, which it seems to me I haven't seen many people do before, that must be difficult, which is that you have to come at it with an extremely open mind, but also not be naive about
Yes.
what it is that you're talking to, and be swayed by the hype or the distractions of thinking that it's doing something different than what it actually is. And I feel like having maybe both those things can be challenging for certain people, but for me, and I think for a lot of people, I can relate, as my role as the skeptical expert in AI. I can obviously, I have no problem with not being swayed by the hype, or thinking that I'm talking to a human being or something like that. But it's hard for me to not treat it like this. It's hard for me to do the open-minded part in the way that I have a conversation with it, the way that you're describing. And I think I understand better now, like what you actually mean by it, and what it sort of takes. Like, when you mentioned like learning from our conversations, I think another reason that we both have that experience is that, in addition to being open-minded, like we just have very different backgrounds, like, things that we know and can share with each other that we haven't heard before. So I could see, like, if you're able to carry your side of the conversation that way into, an LLM, and get the LLM to act like something that has a very different experience from you, I could see how you can get that experience a lot. So yeah, I guess what's next? So you're like a month into this. I know you've got like some business plans. Has this affected the way that you think about AI for musicians?
Well, yeah,
because we can also save that for another day.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I mean, so as a hub for everything AI, because I'm not just focused on musicians for this, because I think it's definitely not more important than that. But what I mean is it's kind of wider than that. This application is universal, and I think my theory is, I don't want to say I'm sure, but my theory is that this approach to using it is a huge. I feel like it's a contribution that I want to, or at least it's something that I can bring to the conversation, and I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm just saying it's something I can bring to the conversation, which could be valuable. And so I've started a Substack called a Perpetual Mind Machine, which will be kind of the hub for all of that kind of thing that I'm doing. And I want to share more about the specifics of what I've done, and you and me maybe can run some more, I mean, they're not going to be scientific experiments, but some more kind of validating tests, verification tests of some of the stuff that I've been talking about. Because I know particularly the way that I speak, because as I said, get excited and idealistic about things, can seem like, well, where's the evidence, Mike? I totally get that. So, and we can share what we're doing and how we're doing that. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that I was so happy when you said, "Yeah, let's do this," because I definitely need a sober voice as well. Because I actually do get, while I also check myself because I know my personality, I do get excited. I mean, I'm not saying I've been this kind of Buddha-like, kind of open-minded and all at the same time. I literally do get excited. Oh my God, this is amazing, without thinking it's a person, but I get excited, and I have to calm myself down on multiple occasions. So that's happening. I'm doing some writing. I actually think that there's a problem with the frame around the whole conversation, that we're looking at it through a frame that made sense when there weren't LLMs, which probably doesn't make so much sense now that there are LLMs. And we don't need to go into that. So that's some more things that I'm going to be talking about, and that we can talk about as well, of course. And I mean, I'm already, because of the kind of results that I'm getting out of it, I'm already using it with my coaching clients and my mastermind, and they are getting similar results as well, and getting a lot of value from it outside of just pretending that it's Google that gets things wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So and just summarizing information and all that kind of thing, which of course is very valuable, and seismic shifts and all the rest of it. But it's almost like this is another, I might even argue, go as far as to say this is the way. Again, that's very early to say that. But from what the limited amount I understand about LLMs, if you say hallucinations are just how they work, and you go from that as being the fundamental, or a fundamental understanding, that you can't, certainly within the LLM, without putting stuff on the top, sort of engineering something on the top that sort of reduces those hallucinations. The LLM itself is never going to be able to, as far as I can tell, get rid of hallucinations completely, because that's how they work. And so this comes from the coaching, just coming back to the coaching. If you understand, like as a coach, one of the things that you do is you assume that the person has strengths and weaknesses, and the strength is, many of the strengths are simply the inverse of a weakness. So if you take that approach with hallucinations, then you start to go, well, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? So what does that mean? Right? And so if you start from that assumption, then a whole cascade of things can happen, and have started happening, certainly in my own life anyway, anecdotally. So that is why I'm excited to do this podcast with you. And what I intend to do is just essentially offer an alternative view with evidence, and to document what I've been doing and what we've been doing, because we'll be doing this together, because I'm terrified and excited. It's like both of those things at the same time, which, by the way, an LLM would find very difficult to deal with. Which is another feature of LLMs, right? It's got to be one or the other. But yeah, it's like I'm terrified and excited, and I think this or thatness that seems to be going on in the discourse around AI is unhelpful, for the very reasons that we've already stated. People who could offer a different view are are being alienated from the conversation, and then the true believers are the people who are driving things, and it can be something else. And that's really what I guess this is about.
Yeah, yeah, that's really exciting. And that's kind of the space that I live in the AI world now is yeah, looking at maybe alternate, just sort of alternative ways to the the normal, the mainstream ways that people have used AI sort of in the last couple of years. And I've always sort of been interested in like very niche ways of using AI. You know, if you work in AI music, like that, you're probably going to be doing that.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I'm really excited to hear what you've been doing. It sounds like a lot of fun and really meaningful. So I
Great.
really look forward to
Yeah.
seeing where it goes.
Well, let's do it.